Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Alex Cuesta Daily Show. How is everybody out there tonight? I'm doing well. It is January 15th of 2022, and I'm really happy that you're all out there to join me in tonight's show. I have a doozy for you because it is, I guess growing up myself, living in a household where I had more of a conservative influence, it is not surprising to see hypocrisy, typically on the left, not on the right, not in my family, but typically on the left, a whole ton of it. And this is not to say that there isn't hypocrisy on both sides, because I guess there is. I don't like to play the agree to disagree game anymore because it's a stupid game. Because as Eric July once says, we don't agree to disagree. You're wrong. I'm right. And I like to agree with him on that. But it's the blatant, more in your face hypocrisy there on the left. And here we're going to see it in real time. So the Democrats decided that it is a good idea to use the filibuster when it is politically expedient for me. And I know, again, people are going to roll their eyes. Politicians all the time use what they say is bad when it's politically expedient for them. Sure. But in this case, it's even more egregious because of the way that they have been talking about the filibuster. Now, they have been framing it in the sense that the Republicans are going to use the filibuster to block a voting rights bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and other voting rights bills that are going to make federal mandates and federal standards for our voting practices in the United States. They are using what happened on January 6th. They are using Trump's challenging of the election, which, mind you, so many Democrats in the past have challenged elections for long times, and not just big time general elections, but little elections. Stacey Abrams comes to mind. Al Gore comes to mind. I know Hillary Clinton mulled it and she eventually gave in. So I don't want to hear anything about challenging elections and how it's unconstitutional and all this nonsense. But the biggest problem with the voting rights bills are there should be no federal standard. It is a state run thing. Each state runs their thing on their own. So the only thing that is done with the Voting Rights Act, I guess, that they try to do is they make sure that the electors have the votes in at a certain time, a standard time, so that it can't be topsy-turvy. So we can get the votes in from the electors in due time and good time. That's about it. But everything else comes from the state side. How they tally it, how they run the show, how the governor certifies it, all that type of stuff is all up to the states between their AGs and their election boards. So what they're trying to do is consolidate the voting. And that is something that we cannot do in this country. Voting cannot be run in a general sense from the federal government. It is meant to be by the people. When the federal government is running it, then that opens up for even more corruption than there already is, and the opportunity for a banana republic to occur. Now, I'm rambling a little, but this is probably going to go a little long because I have two articles to go through and then a brilliant soundbite from Tom Cotton that he put on the Senate floor today. So you'll get that clip. It's a little long, 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes, but it's worth hearing. It's brilliant. And so we're going to go through this. So we're going to go through, I'm probably going to go a little bit quicker than I normally do because I just want to show the blatant hypocrisy here. Now, obviously, what I'm obviously going to show a liberal source and a conservative source. So I'm going to start off with the conservative source. Well, if you want to call them conservative anymore, but Fox News. Fox News has an article by Andrew Mark Miller. Democrats slam for blocking Russia sanctions bill using filibuster they decried as racist. That is a true statement. They have decried it as racist, and they used the filibuster 2 days ago. You can't, there's the underneath byline. You can't make this up, and you really can't. Now, the other article I'm going to be using is an article from CNN, and it's by Ted Barrett and Matthew Hoy. And the title is Senate Votes Down Cruz's Bill to Impose Sanctions Over Nord Stream Pipeline. Now, They mention what was struck down, but they don't mention the filibuster was used by the Democrats to strike this down. The very same filibuster that is apparently a Jim Crow relic. And now, who else did Biden cite that he praised? I forget who it was. George Wallace. That it is a George Wallace relic, a Jim Crow George Wallace relic. And it is racist if you oppose the voting rights bill and use the filibuster. So I guess that's why CNN's keeping it out of its article. So here we go. Let's start with a little bit of the Fox News piece. It's not as long. The CNN one tries to be a little more of a journalist piece to hide the fact that they're not actually doing their jobs. Let's go. Fox News piece. Starting, Senate Democrats were slammed Thursday for taking advantage of the filibuster rule, which prominent members of their party have recently decried as racist, to block a bill from Senate Republican Senator Ted Cruz implementing sanctions on Russia. The Senate voted 55-44 to pass Cruz's sanctions on Russia for its Nord Stream 2 pipeline with Germany, but failed due to a bipartisan agreement to subject it to a 60-vote threshold. A handful of Democrats and Republicans joined in voting for the measure. Now, I have a problem right here, right away. Why are there so many people in the Senate, Democrats particularly, and Rand Paul? I understand Rand Paul's position. He's being a libertarian. He was the lone Republican to object, with a good amount of Democrats coming over, 6 of them coming over to vote for this. But outside of Rand Paul, what are the Democrats' other reasons for not putting sanctions, not putting sanctions on Russia over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Number one, it's an unnecessary pipeline that hurts us completely and totally by doing it with Germany. This is a pipeline that Joe Biden basically rubber stamped after closing down the Keystone pipeline in our country. Mind you of that. He's cool with pollution in Europe and all the harm that it's going to do in Europe, but not on our soil. We need to be squeaky clean. We're trying to save the world here by not doing the same exact thing here that they're doing in Europe, because for whatever reason, in Europe is going to be better than in America. Keep that in mind. But another reason to oppose this is giving this to Putin and Russia is only going to help them gain to continue to push for military actions that they are doing. It is going to continue to allow him to gain money to go after Ukraine officially. They plan on doing it anyway. Crimea was a test to see what the world's going to do. The world did shit besides cry. We're going to see what happens with Ukraine. I have no faith in President Biden to do anything about Ukraine. But but that happened. They filibustered. The vote passed at 55-44, and they filibustered it. The Democrats used the racist filibuster that they have historically used more than anybody because they're the racist party. So let's continue. The new natural gas pipeline, which is awaiting final approval from German and European officials before it goes into operation, has been a particular focus of attention as the U.S. and European allies try to build a package of deterrence strong enough to stop Putin from invading Ukraine. They go on to say the move was met with criticism from conservatives on social media, pointed out that Democrats have tried to abolish and suspend the filibuster. And that Twitter users from just days earlier were praising President Biden, who tried to make the case that the filibuster is akin to George Wallace and Jefferson Davis. Then Fox News goes into a bunch of tweets about it. I'm not one that's really, really big on talking about the tweets unless it's from somebody notable. Chuck Grassley, Senator Grassley came to tweet. For all their talk of eliminating the filibuster /60 vote requirement, the Dems were perfectly happy to use the same 60 vote requirement to block sanctions on Russia last night. The bill got 55 votes, but Dems are blocking it anyway. Isn't that ironic? Republican Senator Chuck Grassley tweeted that. They have another one from Ronna McDaniel I'm not going to go over, and then Donald Trump Jr. They end off the article. President Biden, who has referred to the filibuster as a Jim Crow relic, accused supporters of the filibuster Tuesday of being on the side of Democrat segregationists like Bull Connor and George Wallace. It's all true what they essentially wrote here. Again, I'm not going to go over the tweets. I don't think tweets are news, and I hate when most places use it. I think it's a lazy way of doing journalism. But it is true that they use the filibuster here, and that essentially, just from this article, I will say, it seems like the Democrats are more on the side of Russia than they are on Senator Cruz. Now, one thing that the CNN article does when I go over to it, they provide a little more context. And whether or not you agree with the context, that's fine. But as I went over it, I seemed to notice an interesting thing. They did not use the word filibuster once. All they did in the beginning of the article was acknowledge that it needed 60 votes to pass. Now, mind you, if you're not a savvy political person, you don't understand completely what needed 60 votes to pass means and why it needed 60 votes to pass. It needed 60 votes to pass because the 60 vote threshold was enacted, hence the filibuster was used. This is a sneaky way of omission. This is bad journalism. Ted Barrett and Matthew Hoy engaged in bad journalism. Andrew Mark Miller, also in my viewpoint, engaged in bad journalism, because you'll see Ted Barrett and Matthew Hoy added more context to this. And if you combine both articles, you kind of get the full picture and just realize that journalists are pretty shitty overall right now. So let's go with the CNN article. A little bit longer, so I'm going to kind of try and run through it as quick as I can, but let's go. CNN article. Again, the title, Senate votes down Cruz's bill to impose sanctions over Nord Stream pipeline. The Senate on Thursday voted down legislation from GOP Senator Ted Cruz of Texas to sanction entities. We're not going to be redundant too much. Needing 60 votes to pass. It failed 55-44. Handful of Democrats, again, needed 60 votes to pass. Filibuster invoked. Democrats used the filibuster. Democrats running for re-election voted with Republicans, including Senators Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, Mark Kelly of Arizona, and Raphael Warnock of Georgia. Democrat Senators Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin and Jack Rosen of Nevada also crossed the aisle. Look at what they just did there. Look at what they just did. They just outed all of these Democrats that crossed the aisle. And then they wrote, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was the lone Republican who opposed the bill. And if you are a person who leans right, you would know that this is the exact type of bill that Senator Rand Paul would oppose with his stances on foreign affairs and not interfering in foreign affairs if they have absolutely nothing to do with the United States and nothing to do with national security. So no one should lose sleep over the fact that Rand Paul voted against this. It is completely within his character and his belief system. But what CNN did there, yeah, you could just say they're reporting the news and the journalism on who crossed the aisle. But this is a way of outing these people. A lot of people still, unfortunately, read CNN things, and they will remember these names. And don't think that these people, especially if something like this would have passed, wouldn't have gotten the 10th degree. Let's continue with the article. Biden administration had argued that sanctions would undercut U.S. effort to deter the threat from Russia. A number of Democrats have been weighing whether to break with the White House and back Cruz's measure, wary about appearing soft on Russia amid rising tensions with Ukraine, and eager to send a strong message to Russian President Vladimir Putin, including over the pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany. Yeah, including over the pipeline that President Biden allowed to happen. President Biden gave that rubber stamp. Don't forget that. The vote came after Democrats reached a compromise last month with Cruz, who agreed to lift his holds on multiple Biden administration State Department nominees if he got the vote on his sanctions measure. Ahead of the vote, Senate Foreign Relations Chair Bob Menendez took to the floor to urge members to vote no and lobbied for his own bill that would impose sanctions only if Putin decides to invade Russia. So yes, let Russia start its military invasion, and then let's put some economic ties onto them so we can say, oh, we're trying to stop them. We're trying. Instead of sitting there and trying to help Ukraine, truly help them, and cripple Russia and give them another problem to deal with before they even have the opportunity to go into Ukraine. No, let's let them manufacture a crisis and jump on in, which was another article I read earlier that the Pentagon, I think I read this yesterday or 2 days ago, the Pentagon has credible information that Russia is actively trying to manufacture a problem with their own proxies on the Ukraine border to start the invasion. So what we're seeing here is Bob Menendez would like to, use a little appeasement here. Let them start going, and then we'll do it. And let's see if Russia caves to sanctions. And let's all talk here. How many active, aggressive groups cave to sanctions while they're in it? While they're actually doing their plan, their military might? How many times does that really work? It's not going to work on Russia. And the wait and see approach is not going to work. Let's continue here. Quote, this legislation makes it absolutely clear that the U.S. Senate will not stand idly by as the Kremlin threatens to a reinvasion of Ukraine. The New Jersey Democrats said in a statement Wednesday. Yes, it does. You're saying you're going to wait to see if they invade. Of course, that says you're going to stand idly by, you idiot. Continuing, we are coming together to send a clear message. Putin need not collapse his entire economy, nor does he need to sacrifice the lives of his own people in a futile attempt to rewrite the map of Europe. Ultimately, the most effective sanction on Russia is a strong and unified Ukraine, and I look forward to working with my Democratic and Republican colleagues so that we can provide the people of Ukraine the type of support they need to confront the bully in Moscow. That is a whole bunch of political jargon to say, I don't want to do shit. I don't want to go against Russia in any which way. That's all that they said. A strong and unified Ukraine is the most effective sanction against Russia. What the hell does that even mean? Of course, they don't want to get invaded, you moron. They do not want to get invaded. So, of course, they're going to stand strong and unified against Ukraine. There probably is some sympathizers. There is some Russian-speaking people there that maybe want to, there's probably sections, just like there's sections here of Democrats that absolutely have been against most American things for a long time. So, yeah, you can understand there's idiots in each country. We have a whole entire party of them. They put in the biggest moron in office in President Biden. We have 80 million idiots, apparently. But that whole statement was absolutely nothing. Let's continue. Menendez had been leading the charge against the Cruz bill all week. Quote, Putin wants to see Nord Stream 2. If somehow it's killed before any potential invasion, he has one less reason not to invade Ukraine, Menendez said Tuesday. But if we have the mother of all sanctions levied against him personally and Russia, which is what my legislation will do, then ultimately that is a real deterrent and a calculation for Putin to have to take into consideration as it relates to invading Ukraine. But again, Senator Menendez, your whole entire bill predicates on him actually invading Ukraine already. So what are we doing? What are you doing? If they decide, only going to put it if they decide to invade. Your words do not jive with what your bill wants to do. So why can we take anything Bob Menendez says at face value? Continuing with the article. Cruz believes that the newly constructed 750-mile pipeline, which is not yet operating, would empower Putin and allow him to hold dangerous leverage over Europe by controlling the flow of much-needed natural gas there. The Ukrainian government had come out in support of his plan. Cruz argued that if sanctions aren't enforced, it would be existential for Ukraine. Quote, in days or weeks or months from now, if we turn on the television set and see Russian tanks in the streets of Kiev, the reason will be that the United States Senate heard the pleas of our Ukrainian allies and we turned a deaf ear to them. I pray that we don't do so. The eyes of history are upon us in this body, Republicans and Democrats, to rise to the occasion. End quote. The Biden administration on Wednesday finalized sanction options in the event that Russia invades Ukraine, according to senior administration officials, as talks were ongoing in Europe between U.S., Russia, and NATO officials aimed at averting a war. Now, that concerns me. Sanctioned options. What about war options? What happens there? Because you know what? We are looking at another Hitler-esque thing going on here. And I know people are going to be like, oh, why are you invoking Hitler and this and that? I'm not invoking Hitler to compare Putin to Hitler. They're both kind of madmen, but this is a similar thing. You can't just sanction these types of individuals. And I know nobody wants to go to war with Russia, but that's one of the reasons why Hitler got to do what he did, why he took so many places. No one wanted to go to war with Hitler. None of the European powers were ready to go to war. United States were kind of being isolationist. They didn't want to go to war. Everyone was still seething after that, hurting, licking their own wounds after the First World War. So that allowed Hitler to go and take things. We can't not defend places and see what's going on and say, well, we just don't want to go to war. We're seeing it happen in two fronts right now. We're seeing Russia doing what they're doing with the Crimean Peninsula and now with Ukraine. We're seeing China taking over Hong Kong, going to do everything they want to do to Taiwan. They're going to try to go to Japan. This is all happening with two different fronts in two different crazy leftist, fascist, communist places. And we cannot allow that to happen. That is not something we can do. We will see another world war and we will see atrocities like we have never seen. We know they go on in Russia and we absolutely know they go on in China with the Uyghurs. I agree with Senator Cruz here. We cannot sit on our hands as a country. We cannot continue to be the ones that go, well, we shouldn't get involved and say things like, why are we getting involved? These are the type of things we have to get involved in because if we don't, it will come knocking on our doorstep. I am not a war hawk. But sometimes you need to do what you got to do. And stopping madmen like Putin in places like Russia and psychos like Xi and places like China are very important. Let's continue. The Biden administration has sanctions targets and implementation measures, quote, ready to go to be issued when those tanks cross the border, end quote, a senior administration official said, quote, the final package will depend upon exactly what scenario we are facing, but we are no longer at a point where we have just a memo that lays out options. We have concrete actions that we are ready to hit the return key on, end quote. You know, I hate the wait and see approach. I understand we don't want an all-out war with Russia, but this cannot be tolerated. You cannot tolerate this type of stuff. You can't allow them to take over places just because they say they were once ours. Again, Hitler did that. Russia did it with the Soviet Union when they took a ton of places, and all these places fought so hard to get away from the Soviet Union. And just as they're really getting on their feet completely, we're going to let Russia recreate the Soviet Union. That's essentially what they want to do. Continuing. Another senior administration official said, we are ready for every scenario and the options are very well developed. What about the scenario of putting boots on the ground? Is that a real scenario? Is NATO ready to do that? Because if not, then why is Putin giving a shit? If we are not willing to lend true support, then why should Putin care? And the United States is going to be reluctant, and everyone is going to be reluctant to work with the United States because of how much of an idiot Biden is and how much he blundered Afghanistan. Since he blundered that pullout, since he really fucked it up as bad as he did, who's going to want to work with the United States militarily? Who's going to really want to go side by side with the understanding that our idiot president in chief could make a stupid decision at any time and ruin the whole thing? It's going to be really questionable. Very, 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 very questionable. But we can't sit idly by and do nothing as a madman wants to take over other sovereign nations. Continuing. As CNN previously reported, the White House over the last several weeks had been analyzing the impacts of various sanctions options would have not just on Russia, but also the European and American economies. The administration officials said on Wednesday that the U.S. and allies have determined that while severe economic sanctions will likely have global economic ramifications, any spillover can be managed. We can't worry about that type of stuff. Obviously, they have to. The eggheads have to worry about that. But you need to sometimes go with the short term and look at what we have here and then see if the short term will pay off better for the long term. Because what's going to pay off better? Some economic and global ramifications now to stop Russia from eating a sovereign country and then going after more because they're not going to stop with Ukraine, and then starting to create another Soviet Union, which could potentially have even worse global economic ramifications for all the Western powers involved, or to deal with the ones we have now after going at them, slapping them back down, and I think having a better situation overall. Continuing, final two paragraphs here. Quote, the European financial system and its overall economy are in far better health than in 2014. particularly in the banking sector, one of the officials said. The official also emphasized that this is not a matter of weighing the cost of imposing sanctions against the scenario of a peaceful status quo. Rather, the options have been weighed against the possibility that Russia takes aggressive actions that cause significant destabilization in the heart of Europe. The U.S. is also aware of the risk that Putin tries to retaliate against any economic sanctions by weaponizing the export of Russian gas to Europe, which relies heavily on Russian energy supplies. One of the officials said that if Putin went down that path, it would stiffen the resolve of Europe to find supplies elsewhere. How about the United States? Hey guys, we were the biggest energy producer a little over 2 years ago. We could have provided everybody. We were energy independent until our fearless leader, Mr. Robinette, got in office and decided that's all gone. We don't want to be energy independent anymore. We want to be dependent. We don't want to supply gas and energy to everyone. We want to become a net importer instead of a net exporter. So, yeah, you could have found it elsewhere here. Sorry, guys. Sorry, we have an extremely weak president who makes terrible decisions based off of climate change. Sorry. You guys are just going to have to rely on Russia, who is now going to destabilize everything because we are a weak country with a weak president yet again. Unlike President Trump, who was not weak on this type of stuff. You can knock the guy for things. When it came to foreign affairs, they like to paint the picture that Trump was hated. And maybe he was, but he was respected and feared because they knew Trump was going to put American interests first. And that he wasn't afraid to do what he needed to do in order to make sure that we were taken care of. And that one of his first things was making us energy independent. And we were. And we were starting to make money off of it. We were exporting our energy. And we could have helped in taking care of Europe. Now, Europe is in dire straits because America is weak. And we're not leading again. Oh, signs to Biden. Obama. We hearken back to Obama and his apology tour and his weakness in foreign affairs. But I digress on that. So what did you learn here in the CNN article? A lot of background. Grant you, they did a good job painting the background, Menendez's bill, and adding an extra element to it. And like I said, combine the two articles, you get the whole picture. But the sad thing is they didn't mention the filibuster intentionally, just like the Fox News article didn't mention the Menendez bill intentionally, because that paints a whole different thing. That almost tells you why there were 44 no's, because they wanted to support a colleague. They wanted to support Menendez over Cruz. That ends up making sense. Fox News wanted to demonize the Republicans and make it seem like they were siding with Russia. CNN wanted to hide every freaking fact that the filibuster was used by a group of people calling the filibuster racist, and who will continue to call the filibuster racist as the voting bill continues to be a big topic of discussion. But they are both terrible because they both admitted facts that were important to each story. So remember, when you're reading this type of stuff, if you go to one source and you know it leans one way, please go and try and find the same story in another source that leans the other way. You'll get the whole picture that way. And if you can't find one, then take it with a grain of salt. Know that there are facts in there, but it's not the whole facts probably. It's meant to piss you off. Because if you just read Fox News, you're going to be annoyed that none of the Democrats, that basically only a few of the Democrats sided with the Republicans. And it made it seem like they were in favor of Russia. But when you read CNN, you'll realize that they weren't. But you'll also be a little ignorant to the fact that they used the racist filibuster, the super racist, non-founder put in, not in the Constitution filibuster. Just, 200 years old. No biggie. Just a little bit younger than our whole country. But we're not going to talk about that. All right. Lastly, before we go, I'm going to play this beautiful clip by Senator Tom Cotton. It's from the First Twitter feed here at the First on TV. And what it is him making a speech on the floor about the filibuster. So I just want to have everyone hear that because it is a very good speech and it is a very good frame on the hypocrisy of those on the left. So here we go. Enjoy this. Listen.
The senator from Arkansas.
Right now, we are on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. We're about to step into the abyss I want to talk for a few minutes why we're on that precipice and why we're looking into that abyss. Let me first ask a fundamental question. What is the crisis that calls for the undoing of 2 centuries of tradition? Are senators merely doing their jobs as legislators, responding to a generalized public calling for the abolition of the filibuster? Clearly not. It is not the American people at large who are demanding detonation of the nuclear option. The nuclear option is being pushed largely by the radioactive rhetoric of a small band of radicals who hold in their hands the political fortunes of the president. Constitutional scholars will tell us that the reason we have these rules in the Senate, unlimited debate, 2/3 to change the rules, the idea that 60 have to close off debate, is embodied in the spirit and rule of the Constitution. That is what the Constitution is all about, and we all know it. It is the Senate where the Founding Fathers established a repository of checks and balances. It's not like the House of Representatives, where the majority leader or the speaker can snap his fingers and get what he wants. On important issues the Founding Fathers wanted, and they were correct in my judgment, that the slimmest majority should not always govern. The Senate is not a majoritarian body. The bottom line is very simple. The ideologues in the Senate want to turn the Founding Fathers, what the Founding Fathers called the cooling saucer of democracy, into a rubber stamp of dictatorship. They want to make this country into a banana republic, where if you don't get your way, you change the rules. Are we going to let them? It will be a doomsday for democracy if we do. I, for one, hope and pray that it will not come to this. But I assure my colleagues, at least speaking for this senator, I will do everything I can to prevent the nuclear option from being invoked, not for the sake of myself or my party, but for the sake of this great republic and its traditions. Those are powerful words, but they're not mine. Every word of my speech today was originally spoken by our esteemed colleague, the senior senator from New York, Chuck Schumer. Senator Schumer spoke so eloquently in defense of the Senate's rules, customs, and traditions when the fortunes of his party looked a little different. My, how times have changed. Now it's Senator Schumer's fingers that are hovering over the nuclear button, ready to destroy the Senate for partisan advantage. Think about it. The narrowest majority in Senate history wants to break the Senate rules to control how voters in every state elect senators. Could there be a better argument to preserve the Senate's rules, customs, and traditions? So before it's too late, let us reflect on the wise and eloquent words of Senator Schumer. Words that are as true today as they were when he spoke them, even if Senator Schumer is singing a different tune today. Madam President, I yield the floor.
And there were those words, Senator Tom Cotton speaking on the floor today and using Chuck Schumer's own words against him that he spoke in favor of defending the filibuster. Now, I guess you can turn this around and say, well, the Republicans were the ones trying to get rid of it in yesteryear. And yes, I guess there's hypocrisy to go around on both sides. But the difference is you hear a Chuck Schumer speech today, and it is mighty different than that speech. So I guess it has to do with the fact that maybe that you should stick to your own words, Mr. Schumer. Maybe you should go back to that speech and read and remember why you wrote it. Was it for political expediency? Which one do you believe? If the traditions were racist now, weren't they definitely racist then? The filibuster is racist now. Filibuster has been around for 200 years. I'm sure it was racist when you made that speech. So, thing of beauty, when these politicians get their words used against them, and especially those with the major hypocrisies on the left, like Mr. Schumer from my great state, New York, an embarrassment of a senator. So again, everybody, I'd like to thank you for listening to this show. I appreciate every time anyone decides to come over here and let me talk to them through their ears. If you want to find us on social media, please go and search The Alex Cuesta Show. Wherever you are on social media, it should show up. Cuesta is my last name. Easy to spell. And if you could, please follow, share, rate 5 stars, tell your friends that you enjoy this and they should come on and enjoy this too, because it is lots of fun and wholesome goodness. So once again, I will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. So long all.